The marmalade was still in the refrigerator, 3 inches of bitter orange preserve sitting in a jar with a sticky lid, even though he knew, with a certainty that felt like a bruise, that he had never liked the taste of oranges. Kalen stood in the kitchen of the apartment that supposedly belonged to him, staring at the glass jar. The kitchen smelled of nothing. That was the most terrifying part. It should have smelled of cedar and rain, or perhaps the sharp, clean scent of floor wax and old books, but instead, it was a vacuum. He held his breath, waiting for the walls to speak, for the copper pots hanging above the stove to ring with the memory of a dinner he couldn't recall cooking. There was a man in the living room. The man's name was Elias. Kalen knew this because Elias had told him so 4 days ago in a room that smelled of industrial bleach and dying lilies. Elias was an Omega. Kalen could feel the pull of it, a low-frequency hum in the base of his spine that told him this person was important, but the hum had no lyrics. It was a song played through a thick stone wall. He reached out and touched the cold glass of the marmalade jar. Why would he buy something he hated? The question felt like a splinter under a fingernail. He looked at his own hands. They were steady, tanned, marked with a small white scar across the knuckle of his index finger. He didn't remember getting the scar. He didn't remember the man in the next room. He didn't even remember the way his own name sounded when spoken in a voice that wasn't his own mother's. The silence in the apartment was a living thing, a heavy velvet curtain that muffled the sound of the city outside. He could hear the refrigerator hum. He could hear the distant siren of an ambulance. But he could not hear the sound of 3 years of his life. They were simply gone, erased by the impact of a wet pavement and a steel guardrail on a Tuesday night that had vanished into the ether. 2 months before the kitchen felt like a foreign country, the world had been loud. The hospital room was a symphony of beeps and the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator. Elias sat in the chair by the window, his spine a straight line of calculated endurance. He had been there for 48 hours. He had not changed his shirt. He had not eaten anything other than a bruised apple from a vending machine. When Kalen's eyes finally flickered open, they didn't find the room first. They found the light. And then they found Elias. The Alpha's voice was a dry rattle, a sound like dead leaves blowing across a driveway. "I am sorry," Kalen had whispered, his brow furrowed in a confusion so profound it made Elias's lungs ache. "I am sorry, I do not. I do not know who you are." Elias did not flinch. He did not cry. He did not throw himself onto the bed and beg for a spark of recognition. He simply folded his hands in his lap, his knuckles turning white, and looked at the man he had shared a bed with for over 1,000 days. "I know," Elias said. His voice was a marvel of engineering, perfectly level, perfectly contained. Kalen squinted, the monitors around him chirping in a frantic, syncopated rhythm as his heart rate climbed. "Should I?" Kalen asked. The question was a knife. It was the most honest thing Kalen had ever said to him. Elias looked at the small white scar on Kalen's knuckle, the one Kalen had gotten while trying to fix a broken shelf in their first apartment because he was too stubborn to call a professional. "Yes," Elias replied. "You should." But he didn't offer a name. He didn't offer a history. He waited for the doctors to come in with their clipboards and their specialized vocabulary for the emptiness in Kalen's head. The doctor was a woman with silver hair and a voice that sounded like gray paper. She used the words retrograde amnesia as if they were a diagnosis rather than a tragedy. She explained that the brain is a delicate instrument, and sometimes, when it is jarred too violently, it resets. The last 3 years had been stored in a part of the hardware that was currently inaccessible. It might come back in a week. It might come back in a year. It might stay buried forever, a sunken ship at the bottom of a very dark ocean. Kalen listened to her with the intensity of a student failing a test. He kept looking at Elias. He was looking for a tether. He was looking for a reason why this stranger was allowed to sit so close to his bed. Elias felt the gaze, felt the searching, hungry quality of it, and he purposely looked away. He looked at the rain streaking the hospital window. He made a decision in that moment, a silent vow that would structure every hour of the months to follow. He would not be a ghost story. He would not haunt Kalen with the phantom of the man he used to be. If Kalen was starting from zero, then Elias would start from zero too. He would not perform the role of the grieving lover. He would be a fact. A data point. A person who happened to be there. He would not trap Kalen in a cage of shared memories that Kalen no longer possessed. It was a form of mercy that felt exactly like an execution. In the library, 3 years and 4 months before the accident, the air had been thick with the scent of old paper and the coming winter. Kalen had been looking for a specific architectural manual, something obscure and leather-bound. He had turned a corner and nearly collided with a man carrying a stack of books so high he couldn't see over the top. The scent hit Kalen first, a sharp, electric burst of ozone and crushed mint. It was the scent of an Omega who was tired, overworked, and fundamentally brilliant. Kalen had reached out to steady the stack, his hand brushing against the other man's fingers. The spark was instantaneous, a literal jolt of static electricity that made them both jump. Elias had peeked around the side of the books, his eyes wide and startled, his hair a mess of dark curls that looked like they hadn't seen a comb in 12 hours. "Sorry," Elias had breathed. "I'm a bit of a disaster today." Kalen hadn't let go of the books. He hadn't let go of the moment. "You're not a disaster," Kalen had said, his voice dropping into a register he didn't know he possessed. "You're just carrying too much. Let me help." They had stood there for a long minute, two strangers in a quiet aisle, while the world outside continued to spin toward a Tuesday night on a wet highway. Elias had smiled then, a small, tentative thing that had cracked Kalen's world wide open. That was the beginning of the 3 years. That was the first brick in the house that had just been burned to the ground. Back in the present, in the kitchen with the marmalade, Kalen heard the floorboard creak in the hallway. Elias appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a sweater that Kalen vaguely recognized, a soft charcoal wool that made his skin look pale. He didn't come into the kitchen. He stayed on the threshold, a ghost in his own home. "You don't like that," Elias said quietly. His eyes were on the jar of marmalade. Kalen looked down at it. "I know," he said. "I can feel that I don't like it. But I don't know why it's here." Elias leaned against the doorframe, his posture guarded. "You bought it for me," he said. 6 months ago. You said the color reminded you of the sun in October. You hate the taste, but you like seeing it in the fridge because it meant I was here." Kalen felt a sharp pang in his chest, a physical contraction of his heart. He wanted to remember the sun in October. He wanted to remember the impulse to buy a gift that was a beautiful inconvenience. "I'm sorry," Kalen said again. It was the only phrase he felt he had the right to use. Elias just nodded. "Don't be. You can throw it away if it bothers you. I'm going to make some tea. Do you want the one with the blue label or the red label?" Kalen hesitated. He didn't know. He had no idea which one he preferred. The red one, he guessed. Elias paused, his hand halfway to the cupboard. He didn't correct him. He didn't say that Kalen had always found the red one too floral. He simply reached for the red tin. "Okay," he said. "The red one it is." The systematic questioning began in the 3rd week after Kalen returned to the apartment. Kalen sat at the dining table with a notebook, his pen hovering over the blank white pages. He felt like an investigator at a crime scene where he was both the victim and the lead suspect. "What did we do on weekends?" Kalen asked. Elias was in the kitchen, his back to Kalen as he washed the dinner dishes. The sound of the water was a constant, rhythmic backdrop to the interrogation. "We walked," Elias said. "You liked the park near the river. You liked to look at the bridges and complain about the structural integrity of the suspension cables. You're an architect, Kalen. You see the world in terms of what holds it up." Kalen wrote down, "architect. Complains about bridges." It felt like writing a biography of a stranger. "Did we have friends?" Elias turned off the water. "A few. Leora, your sister. She's been calling every day. I told her to give you space until you were ready. And a couple named Marcus and Sarah." We used to have dinner with them on Fridays. Kaylin looked at the notebook. Were we happy? The question hung in the air, heavy and unbreathable. Elias picked up a dish towel and began to dry a plate with meticulous care. Yes, he said. We were happy. You look happy in the photographs, Kaylin observed, gesturing to the small framed picture on the sideboard that he had been staring at for 3 hours. In the photo, they were on a beach. Kaylin had his arm around Elias's shoulders, and they were both laughing, their faces sun-drenched and relaxed. Elias didn't look at the photo. He couldn't. He looked at the window instead. You were very good at making me laugh, Elias said. It was a skill you took very seriously. Kaylin felt a wave of frustration. It was like trying to grasp smoke. He could see the shape of the life they had, but he couldn't feel the heat of it. He looked at Elias's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyelashes cast long shadows on his cheeks. He found Elias beautiful, but it was the beauty of a statue in a museum. He knew he was supposed to feel a profound, soul-deep connection, but all he felt was a polite interest and a crushing sense of debt. He owed this man his heart, but he had lost the key to the vault where it was kept. Leora came over on a Tuesday, 4 weeks after the accident. She was a whirlwind of scent, jasmine and nervous energy. She hugged Kaylin so hard he could feel her heart beating against his ribs. You look better, she lied, her eyes scanning his face for a sign of her brother. Kaylin smiled, but it was a practiced motion, a mimicry of what he thought a brother should do. I feel fine, Leora. Just empty. Leora looked past him to Elias, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Elias looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of composure could hide. Leora's expression softened into something like pity. How are you holding up, Elias? She asked. Elias handed her a mug, his fingers steady. I'm fine, Leora. We're just taking it one day at a time. Kaylin watched the exchange. He saw the way Leora looked at Elias, a gaze full of unspoken history and shared secrets. He felt like an intruder in his own conversation. Leora stayed for an hour, talking about her job and their parents, avoiding the 3-year gap as if it were a landmine. When she left, she pulled Elias aside in the hallway. Kaylin stood around the corner, his enhanced alpha hearing picking up their whispered words. You can't keep doing this, Elias, Leora whispered. You're fading away. You have to tell him. Elias's voice was a sharp, low hiss. Tell him what? That I'm mourning a man who was standing right in front of me? That every time he looks at me with those polite, stranger's eyes, I want to scream? No. I made a promise, Leora. I won't be the one to break it. Kaylin pulled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. A promise. What promise? He walked back into the living room and sat on the sofa, his mind spinning. He looked at the bookshelf, at the titles he supposedly loved. Everything was a riddle. Everything was a door he didn't have the password for. In the second month, the alpha's process shifted. He stopped asking about the past and started watching the present. He noticed that Elias always woke up at 6:30 in the morning, even on Saturdays. He noticed that Elias liked his tea with exactly 2 drops of honey, never more, never less. He noticed that Elias would sometimes stand in the middle of a room and just stop, his eyes fixed on nothing, his hand hovering over a piece of furniture as if he were waiting for it to move. Kaylin found himself drawn to these moments of stillness. He found himself wanting to fill the silence. You're very patient with me, Kaylin said one evening while they were sitting on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The air was cooling, the first hint of autumn biting at the edges of the breeze. Elias was wrapped in a blanket, his scent muted by the cold. No, Elias said, not looking at him. I'm patient with the situation. Kaylin frowned. What's the difference? Elias finally turned his head, his eyes dark and unreadable in the twilight. You don't owe me patience in return, Kaylin. The situation does. If I am patient with you, it implies that you are doing something wrong, that you are failing at being yourself. But you aren't. You're just new. The situation, however, is a thief. It stole 3 years. I am very, very angry at the situation. But I am not angry at you. Kalen reached out, his hand hovering near Elias's on the railing. He didn't touch him. He didn't know if he was allowed. Do you want me to be who I was? Kalen asked. Or who I am? Elias looked at the city lights, his breath hitching just slightly. I want you to be who you are, he said. I was in love with who you were. That person is gone. He's a memory I'm keeping in a box. The person you are is someone I'm getting to know. Kalen felt a strange, sharp pang of jealousy. He was jealous of himself. He was jealous of the ghost that Elias was keeping in a box. Is that okay? Kalen whispered. Elias turned back to him, and for the first time, Kalen saw a flicker of the fire that must have burned between them. It's the only honest answer I have, Elias said. And then he stood up and went inside, leaving the scent of crushed mint and ozone lingering in the cold air. One night, 3 years and 2 months before the accident, they had been lying in bed, the moonlight filtering through the curtains in silver stripes. They had been together for 2 months, and the bond was still fresh, still raw and overwhelming. Kalen had been tracing the line of Elias's collarbone with his thumb. Elias, Kalen had said, his voice heavy with a sudden, dark gravity. Promise me something. Elias had hummed, his eyes half closed. Anything. Kalen had gripped his shoulder, his fingers digging in just a little too hard. If anything ever happens to me, if I ever lose my mind, or my memory, or the part of me that knows how to love you, don't make me a prisoner of your memory. Don't spend your life trying to fix a broken version of us. Let me be free, Elias. Even if it means I don't know who you are. Promise me you won't trap me in a ghost of a life. Elias had opened his eyes then, his expression hurt and confused. Why are you saying this? Kalen had shaken his head, his face buried in the crook of Elias's neck. I've seen it happen. People holding on to shadows. I love you too much to let you become a caretaker for a shadow. Promise me. Elias had been silent for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the bedside table. I promise, he had finally whispered, his voice trembling. I promise, Kalen. But you have to promise to stay. Kalen had laughed then, a sound full of arrogance and youth. I'm not going anywhere, he had said. I'm right here. He had been wrong. He had gone exactly where he feared, and Elias was keeping his word with a devastating, surgical precision. In the 4th month of the recovery, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. It wasn't that the memory came back, it was that the absence of it began to feel like a presence. Kalen was starting to find his way around the city without a map. He would turn a corner and realize he knew exactly where the bakery was. He would hear a song on the radio and know the next lyric before it was sung. It wasn't remembering, it was a physical habit, a muscle memory of the soul. But Elias was becoming more distant. He was spending more time in the small room he used as an office, the door closed, the light burning late into the night. Kalen felt the gap between them widening, and for the first time, he felt a genuine fear of losing the man he didn't even know he had. He found Elias in the kitchen one morning, staring at a piece of paper. Elias's face was bloodless, his hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. Elias? Kalen asked, stepping into the room. What is it? Elias didn't look up. He didn't move. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps, a man who had realized he was the ghost. There's something you should know, Elias said. His voice was hollow, a sound from the bottom of a well. This isn't about the past, Kalen. This isn't about the 3 years you lost. It's about now. He handed Kalen the paper. It was a medical report. Kalen scanned the lines, the technical terms, the dates. It took him a moment to understand. It took him another moment to breathe. You're pregnant? Kalen whispered. Elias finally looked at him, and his eyes were full of a terrifying, raw vulnerability. 4 months, Elias said. It happened just before the accident. I didn't know. I found out 2 weeks ago. Kalen felt the world tilt on its axis. He looked at Elias's stomach, still flat beneath the heavy wool of his sweater. He thought of the 3 years he didn't remember. He thought of the man who had bought the marmalade and complained about bridges. And then he thought of the man he was now, standing in a kitchen with a stranger who was carrying his child. He didn't feel the weight of the past. He felt the weight of the future. He stepped forward, crossing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He reached out and took Elias's hands. They were ice cold. I don't remember choosing you the first time, Kalen said, his voice cracking. I don't remember the library, or the beach, or the sun in October. I don't remember the man who made that promise to you. But I am standing here right now, and I am choosing you. I am choosing this. I am choosing us. Elias let out a choked sound, a sob that had been building for 4 months. He collapsed against Kalen's chest, his forehead resting on the alpha's shoulder. That's enough, Elias whispered into the charcoal wool. That's enough. The weeks that followed were a blur of a different kind. The medical appointments, the vitamins, the books on parenting that now sat on the coffee table next to the architectural manuals. Kalen was learning Elias all over again, but this time, he wasn't looking for clues to a mystery. He was looking for the person who was right in front of him. He learned that Elias was afraid of thunderstorms but loved the smell of the air after they passed. He learned that Elias was a brilliant editor who could find the flaw in a sentence from a mile away. He learned that when Elias was happy, his scent changed from crushed mint to something warmer, something like honey and sunlight. One evening, while Kalen was cooking dinner, a pasta dish he had discovered he actually enjoyed making, he felt a sudden, sharp sensation in his mind. It wasn't a memory. It was an echo. He was standing at the stove, stirring the sauce, and he had a sudden, overwhelming urge to turn around and say something specific. He turned, his mouth already open. Elias was sitting at the table, watching him. Don't forget the basil, Kalen said. The words came out without thought, a reflex. Elias froze. What did you say? Kalen blinked, the spoon still in his hand. I don't know. I just felt like I should say it. You always forget the basil. Elias's eyes filled with tears. I do, he whispered. I always do. Kalen stood there, the steam from the pasta rising around him. It wasn't a ship returning from the bottom of the ocean. It was a single piece of wreckage floating to the surface. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He walked over to the table and sat down, taking Elias's hand in his. Tell me something, Kalen said. Tell me something about us that isn't in a notebook. Elias smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Once, he said, we went to a cabin in the mountains. It rained for 3 days straight. We didn't have any cell service, and we ran out of coffee on the second day. You tried to make tea out of pine needles. Kalen laughed. How did it taste? Elias squeezed his hand. Like a forest fire. It was the worst thing I've ever tasted. Kalen leaned in, his forehead resting against Elias's. I'm sorry I can't remember the pine needle tea, he whispered. But I'll remember this. I'll remember right now. 3 years after the accident, the apartment was no longer a silent museum. It was a battlefield of plastic blocks, picture books, and the chaotic, joyous energy of a 2-year-old named Leo. Leo had Kalen's eyes and Elias's stubborn streak. He was the bridge between the 2 lives Kalen had lived, the one he had lost and the one he had built. Kalen was standing in the kitchen, looking for a snack for Leo, when he found the jar of marmalade. It was a new jar, the lid clean and the preserves a bright, vibrant orange. He smiled and put it on the counter. He didn't like the taste, but he liked seeing it there. It meant Elias was home. Elias walked into the kitchen, carrying a basket of laundry. He stopped when he saw Kalen staring at the jar. Still hate it? Elias asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. With a passion, Kalen said, pulling Elias into his arms. But it's beautiful. Elias leaned into the embrace, his head resting on Kalen's chest. "Happy anniversary, Kalen." Kalen pulled back, looking at him. "Is it?" Elias nodded. 3 years today since you came home from the hospital." Kalen was silent for a moment. "I've been with you for as long as I lost," he said softly. Elias looked at him, his expression tender. "Yes. You have." Kalen ran his thumb over the small white scar on his knuckle, the one he now knew the story of. "One of those periods I remember and one I don't," he said. He looked around the kitchen, at the messy counters and the drawings pinned to the refrigerator and the man in his arms. "The one I remember is better." Elias laughed softly, a sound that was now the foundation of Kalen's world. "You can't compare them, Kalen. You don't have both. You don't know what the first 3 years were like." Kalen kissed his forehead, the scent of honey and sunlight filling his lungs. "I have one of them," Kalen said. "And I have you. That's enough to know." He didn't need the sunken ship. He had the shore. He had the house. He had the man who had waited for him in the dark and the child who had led them into the light. The memory was gone, but the love had remained, a stubborn, persistent thing that didn't need a map to find its way home. In the quiet hours of the night, when the city was a distant hum and Leo was asleep in the room down the hall, Kalen would sometimes lie awake and think about the man he used to be. He wondered what that man would think of this life. He wondered if the Kalen who had made that promise would be angry that Elias had broken it, or if he would be grateful that Elias had been brave enough to stay. He thought about the library and the pine needle tea and the sun in October. They were stories now, told to him by the person who loved him most. They weren't his memories, but they were his history. He realized then that Elias hadn't just been patient with the situation, he had been the architect of a new world. He had taken the wreckage of a tragedy and built a sanctuary. Kalen reached out in the dark, his hand finding Elias's under the covers. Elias stirred, his fingers intertwining with Kalen's automatically, a reflex of the body and the heart. "I'm here," Elias whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "I know," Kalen replied. "I know exactly where you are." And as the moon cast silver stripes across the floor, Kalen finally let go of the ghost. He didn't need to find the lost years anymore. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, in a life that was new and old all at once, a life that was built on a promise broken for all the right reasons. The silence was no longer a vacuum. It was a space waiting to be filled with the sounds of tomorrow. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, the scent of cedar and rain finally returning to the room. The hospital had a record for a patient admitted that night. The record listed cause of admission as a motor vehicle accident, the treating physician as a neurologist named Dr. Aris, and the discharge date is 22 days later. The name field was filled in with bold, black letters, Kalen Vance. But in the notes section, at the very bottom of the page, there was a small, handwritten scrawl from a nurse who had been on duty the night he woke up. The note didn't mention medical stats or neurological responses. It simply said, "The partner stayed." He didn't leave the room for 3 days. He spoke to the patient in a voice that sounded like a prayer. When the patient woke up and didn't know him, the partner didn't cry. He just sat there and waited for the world to begin again. That was the detail that mattered. That was the truth that the official records couldn't capture. The accident took the memory, but it couldn't take the choice. And in the end, the choice was the only thing that was real. The rest was just noise. The rest was just the way we tell ourselves stories to make the darkness feel less vast. Kalen turned over in his sleep, his hands still locked with Elias's, two people who had found each other twice in one lifetime, proving that some bonds are written in a language that the brain can forget but the soul always recognizes. The marmalade sat in the dark kitchen, a small, bitter orange monument to a love that was brave enough to start from zero. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The light in the hallway flickered, a small electrical hiccup that Kalen had been meaning to fix for months. He stood on a chair, a screwdriver in his hand, while Leo held the base of the chair with a seriousness that was adorable. "Careful, Daddy," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "I'm being careful, Leo," Kalen said, his eyes on the wiring. He felt a strange sense of déjà vu, a flicker of a memory of another hallway, another light, another person watching him with a mixture of love and exasperation. He didn't try to catch the memory. He let it pass by like a bird in the sky. He didn't need to own it to know it was there. He finished the repair and hopped down, picking Leo up and swinging him around until the toddler shrieked with laughter. Elias appeared in the doorway, a tray of sandwiches in his hands. "Lunch is ready," he said, his eyes crinkling in that specific way that Kalen had learned meant he was truly happy. Kalen set Leo down and walked over to Elias, taking a sandwich and taking a bite. It was peanut butter and honey. Simple. Sweet. Real. "You know," Kalen said, his mouth half full. "I think I'm starting to like the marmalade." Elias raised an eyebrow, a skeptical smile playing on his lips. "Really?" Kalen nodded, his eyes fixed on Elias's. "Yeah. It's growing on me. It's got a bit of a bite, but it lingers. Kind of like you." Elias laughed and swatted his arm. "Eat your sandwich, Kalen." Kalen smiled and pulled him close, the scent of honey and sunlight and home wrapping around them like a warm blanket. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if the lost years would ever come back. But as he stood there in the sunlight of his own kitchen, he knew one thing for certain. He was home. And that was all the memory he would ever need. The story wasn't about what had been lost. It was about what had been found in the wreckage. It was about the strength it takes to let go of a ghost and the courage it takes to love a stranger who has your own heart in his hands. And as the sun moved across the floor, casting long, golden shadows, Kalen realized that he hadn't just fallen in love twice. He had been falling in love every single day, in every single moment, since the very first time he saw a man carrying too many books in a quiet library aisle. The song had its lyrics now. And they were beautiful. Leora sat on the park bench, watching Leo run through the grass. Elias was sitting next to her, his hands wrapped around a thermos of tea. "It's been 3 years, Leora said softly. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias watched Kalen chase Leo, the alpha's laughter carrying across the park. "Regret what?" Elias asked. "Not telling him? Not forcing him to remember?" Elias took a sip of his tea, the steam rising in the cool air. "No," he said. "I don't regret it. If I had forced him to remember, he would have been a prisoner of my grief. He would have been trying to live up to a version of himself that didn't exist anymore. This way he got to choose. And he chose me, Leora. He chose me without the history. He chose me because of who I am now. That's a gift I wouldn't trade for all the memories in the world." Leora nodded, her eyes misting over. "You're a better person than I am, Elias. I don't think I could have done it." Elias smiled, a small, sad, beautiful thing. "You do what you have to do for the people you love, Leora. Sometimes love looks like holding on. And sometimes, it looks like letting go so they can find their own way back to you." Kalen looked up then, waving at them from across the field. He looked happy. He looked whole. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was and where he belonged. Elias waved back, his heart full to bursting. He had kept his promise. He had let Kalen be free. And in that freedom, Kalen had found his way home. The 3 years were gone, but the life they had built in their wake was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than anything they had had before. It was a second chance that most people never get, and Elias was determined to cherish every second of it. He stood up and walked toward them, toward his family, toward his future. The past was a closed book, but the pages ahead were blank and waiting to be written. And he couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would hold. The scent of cedar and rain was faint, but it was there, a quiet reminder of the man who had been and the man who was. And as Elias reached Kalen's side, the alpha reached out and pulled him close, his scent merging with Elias's in a perfect, seamless harmony. "We should go," Kalen said. "It's starting to get cold." Elias nodded, leaning his head on Kalen's shoulder. "Yeah. Let's go home." And as they walked away, the park fell silent, the only sound the wind whispering through the trees, carrying the echoes of a story that had no end, only a series of new beginnings. Kalen lay in bed that night, the house quiet and the moonlight silver. He thought about the marmalade. He thought about the library. He thought about the pine needle tea. He thought about the man who had made a promise and the man who had kept it. He realized then that the most important part of a story isn't the beginning or the end. It's the middle. It's the part where you're lost and you don't know the way out, but you keep walking anyway. It's the part where you're hurt and you're scared and you're empty, but you still reach out for someone's hand. He reached out now, his fingers finding Elias's in the dark. Elias was already awake, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You okay?" Elias whispered. Kalen squeezed his hand. "Yeah. I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am," Kalen said. Elias smiled, his thumb tracing the scar on Kalen's knuckle. "I'm the lucky one, Kalen." "No," Kalen said, his voice firm. "We both are. We got a second first meeting. Not many people can say that." Elias laughed softly and pulled the covers up. "Go to sleep, Kalen. We have a big day tomorrow. Leo wants to go to the zoo." Kalen smiled and closed his eyes. The zoo. Another memory to make. Another brick in the house. He drifted off to sleep, the scent of his mate and his child filling the room, a scent that was more familiar than his own name, a scent that he would never, ever forget again. The darkness was no longer a threat. It was just a place where the stars could shine more brightly. And as the night wore on, the two of them slept, their hearts beating in time, a silent testament to the power of a love that can survive even when the mind fails. The 3 years were gone, but the love was here to stay. And that was all that mattered. The marmalade sat on the counter, a bright, bitter, beautiful promise. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. The end of the story was just the beginning of the rest of their lives. And Kalen Vance, the man who had lost himself, had finally been found. Not by a memory, but by a heart that had never stopped beating for him. And in the quiet of the night, the world was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Perfect. Whole. And full of light. The clock on the bedside table ticked away the seconds, each one a new moment, a new memory, a new chance to say I love you. And Kalen, in the depths of his sleep, knew that he would say it every single day for the rest of his life. Because he knew, now more than ever, how precious those words truly were. And he would never take them for granted again. The silence was gone. The song was playing. And it was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. In the quiet of the early morning, before Leo woke up and the world became loud again, Elias would sometimes sit on the balcony and look at the city. He thought about the man Kalen used to be, the one who was so afraid of becoming a shadow. He thought about the man Kalen was now, the one who wasn't afraid of anything as long as he had his family. He realized that Kalen hadn't just lost his memory, he had lost his fear. He had been given a clean slate, and he had used it to build something even more beautiful than what had been there before. Elias felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had kept his promise, and in doing so, he had saved them both. He took a sip of his tea, the warmth spreading through his chest. He heard a movement behind him and turned to see Kalen standing in the doorway, his hair a mess and his eyes sleep-heavy. "What are you doing out here?" Kalen asked, his voice a low rumble. "Just thinking," Elias said, reaching out a hand. Kalen took it and pulled him close, his warmth a solid, grounding presence. "Come back to bed," Kalen whispered. "It's too early for thinking." Elias smiled and leaned his head on Kalen's chest. "You're right. It is." They walked back inside, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving the city and the past and the silence outside. They were together, and that was all that mattered. The 3 years were gone, but the future was theirs. And it was going to be magnificent. They climbed back into bed, the sheets cool and the room dark, and as they drifted back to sleep, they were no longer two strangers trying to find a common ground. They were one soul, one heart, one life. And nothing, not even a wet highway on a Tuesday night, could ever change that. The marmalade sat on the counter, a silent witness to a love that had triumphed over the darkness. It was a beautiful, bitter, sweet reminder that even when we lose everything, we can still find our way home. And as the sun began to rise, casting the first light of a new day across the apartment, Kaylin and Elias slept on, their dreams full of the life they were building together, a life that was even better than the one they had lost. Because this time, they weren't just living it. They were choosing it. Every single day. And that made all the difference in the world. The story was finally complete. Not because the memory had returned, but because the love had remained. And in the end, that was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The end. Or rather, the beginning. Of everything. Kaylin woke up again, but this time, he knew exactly where he was. He knew the scent of the sheets, the sound of the breathing next to him, the way the light hit the ceiling in the morning. He looked at Elias, who was still asleep, his face peaceful and relaxed. He felt a surge of love so strong it made his chest ache. He thought about the accident, the hospital, the months of confusion and fear. He thought about the man he had been and the man he was now. He realized that the accident hadn't been an end, it had been a transformation. He had been broken, yes, but he had been put back together in a way that was stronger and more resilient. He reached out and touched Elias's cheek, his fingers light as a feather. Elias stirred, his eyes opening slowly. "Morning," he whispered, a small smile playing on his lips. "Morning," Kaylin replied, his voice full of warmth. "I love you." Elias's eyes softened, his hand coming up to cover Kaylin's. "I love you too." They lay there for a long time, just looking at each other, the silence between them full of everything they had been through and everything they were yet to face. They knew it wouldn't always be easy. They knew there would be challenges and obstacles and moments of doubt. But they also knew that they could handle anything as long as they were together. They had proven that already. They had survived the worst, and they had come out the other side stronger than ever. They were a team, a partnership, a bond that couldn't be broken. And as they finally got out of bed to start their day, they did so with a sense of purpose and a sense of joy that they had never known before. They were ready for whatever the world had in store for them. Because they had each other. And that was more than enough. The marmalade stayed in the fridge, a small, bitter orange reminder of the journey they had taken. It was a part of their story now, a part of their history. And they wouldn't change a single second of it. Because it had led them here. To this moment. To this life. To this love. And as they walked into the kitchen to make breakfast, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. It was a beautiful day. It was a perfect day. It was their day. And they were going to make the most of every single minute of it. Together. Always. The end of the beginning. The beginning of the forever. And as the sound of Leo's laughter echoed through the apartment, Kaylin and Elias smiled at each other, their hearts full of the simple, profound truth that love is the only memory that truly matters. And they were never going to forget it again. Not ever. Not in 1,000 years. Not in 1,000,000 lifetimes. They were home. And they were happy. And that was the greatest story of all. The marmalade jar sat on the counter, its orange contents glowing in the morning sun. It was a small thing, a trivial thing, but it was a symbol of everything they had overcome. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit and the resilience of the human heart. It was a reminder that even in the face of the greatest tragedy, there is always hope. There is always a way back. There is always a chance to start again. And as Kaylin spread a bit of the marmalade on a piece of toast for Elias, he did so with a smile. He still hated the taste, but he loved what it represented. He loved the man he had bought it for. And he loved the life they had built together. It was a good life. It was a beautiful life. It was their life. And they were going to live it to the fullest. Every single day. For as long as they both should live. And even beyond that. Because some loves are so strong, they transcend even time itself. And theirs was one of them. They were Kaylin and Elias. And they were home. 3 years and 6 months after the accident, Kalen was looking through a box of old things in the back of the closet. He found a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it and saw his own handwriting, but it was from the time before. The entries were brief, mostly architectural notes and sketches. But on the last page, there was a single sentence written in bold, dark ink. It said, "If you're reading this, it means you stayed. Thank you for staying, Elias." Kalen felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't remembered writing that. He didn't remember the moment he had put those words on the page. But he felt the weight of them. He felt the love that had prompted them. He closed the notebook and held it to his chest, his eyes closing. He didn't need the memory to know the truth. He had lived the truth every day for the last 3 years. He walked out of the bedroom and found Elias in the living room, playing with Leo. He walked over and handed Elias the notebook. "I found this," Kalen said softly. Elias read the last page, his eyes filling with tears. He looked up at Kalen, his face full of a profound, soul-deep gratitude. "He stayed, Kalen," Elias whispered. "He always stayed." Kalen pulled them both into a hug, his heart full to bursting. "I know," Kalen said. "I know he did. And I'm never going anywhere either." They sat there on the floor, surrounded by toys and books and the echoes of 1,000 days, a family built on the wreckage of a memory and the strength of a promise. They were whole. They were complete. They were home. And as the sun set over the city, casting a warm, purple glow over everything, Kalen realized that the 3 years he had lost weren't really lost at all. They were right here, in the eyes of his mate and the laughter of his son. They were in the way Elias held his hand and the way Leo called his name. They were in every kiss and every smile and every shared moment. They were the foundation of everything he was and everything he would ever be. And he didn't need to remember them to feel them. He felt them every time he breathed. He felt them every time he looked at his family. He felt them in the very marrow of his bones. He was Kalen Vance, and he was the luckiest man in the world. Because he had been given a second chance to love the person he was always meant to be with. And he was never, ever going to let it go. Not again. Not ever. The story was finally, truly, over. And it was the most beautiful story he had ever known. The end was just the beginning. And the beginning was forever. And forever was right now. In this room. In this light. In this love. They were home. And they were happy. And that was all that mattered. The marmalade jar sat on the counter, a small, orange beacon in the growing darkness. It was a symbol of a love that had survived the impossible. A love that had been tested and tried and had come out stronger than ever. A love that was, and always would be, enough. And as the night fell, the three of them stayed there, together, in the warmth and the light of their own home, ready for whatever the future might bring. Because they had each other. And that was the greatest gift of all. The end. Of the beginning. Of the forever. Of everything. And it was beautiful. It was perfect. It was home. Kalen closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. He was happy. He was whole. He was home. And he was never going to forget it again. Not in a million years. Not in a billion lifetimes. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. And he was with exactly who he was supposed to be with. And that was the most important memory of all. The one that was happening right now. And the one that would happen tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day for the rest of his life. He was Kalen Vance. And he was home. The end. Truly. Finally. Perfectly. The end.